here at the Loops podcast with Brother Andrew Bentley, who resides in Calgary, Alberta. And you've been there how many years, Brother Bentley?
44 years.
Okay. Wow. And so you've been involved with Truth Church in Calgary under Brother Johnny King and now Brother Douglas Walker.
Yes, sir.
And you have an amazing testimony background in the corporate world, included in that, extrapolating things from that into ministry and vice versa, what works, doesn't work, systems, how to organize, administration. A lot of that stuff is very, very valuable, I think, to the apostolic world, especially the way that you can articulate it into spirituality.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it's very good to have you. Loops, we call it loops because we feel like everything loops back into the kingdom of God. That's the name of it. That's the point of it. No matter what you do, everything loops back into the kingdom of God. So for this podcast, one of the things that I really want to talk to you about is a philosophy of how to deal with situations. It could be situations in a church. It could be situations in an organization. And extrapolated from that, it could be job. And it could just be interacting with people. And that is the philosophy of ideas. Because most people, that's not, the old adage is people don't talk about ideas. They talk about people and they talk about problems. It's not a default position for them to even think. In my DNA, I want the discussion to be about solutions and ideas. And I've just found the older I'm getting, and the more life knowledge and skill, that the most fun is usually when you're talking about ideas. How can we do this better? What can we do? How does this interconnect? And is that a general sentiment that you feel? What is the general proclivity of people?
I think Eleanor Roosevelt said it best. Great minds talk about ideas. Average minds talk about events. And small minds talk about people.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the excitement and the opportunity is around ideas.
Right.
I love to talk ideas. I love the excitement. I love the ability to riff off another human being, the ability to expand my faith, to see things that I hadn't previously seen. I think that was, you think about the New Testament and what Jesus did as a great narrator, as a great storyteller, was he cast ideas in a way that was not only profound, but also counterintuitive.
Yeah.
You've heard it said, but I say.
Yeah.
And that to me is the beauty of and the prose of the New Testament, that how he narrates those ideas to us.
Yeah. Well, in John 1:1, the Logos is the idea, plan, statement of God. And it becomes an idea incarnated because it states that the Word in verse 14, and the Word was made flesh. And so you see that juxtaposition of what Jesus is coming with an idea that becomes incarnated, and he's always talking about the kingdom of God. It's an idea. It's the approach. It's the plan. It's the direction. And the disciples are having problems because they're looking at personalities. Who's the greatest? Who can sit on the left hand and the right hand? They're arguing about stuff, right? They're even arguing about ministry and methodology, or they're stuck on problems. So when they come up against, well, we don't have enough food, it's a problem. When it's money matters, it's a problem. If it's failure in their ministry, we try to cast demons out, and we couldn't. It's always focusing on the problems. And in Jesus' ministry with the disciples, they have a hard time grasping the idea of the kingdom of God until his resurrection. And then it starts to clear up. And even at that, you get into Acts, they're still having problems. Peter and Paul are having problems with the Gentiles and the Jews.
And Barnabas. The list goes on.
Yeah. So what I'd like to do is throw some things at you and you respond to them. How can we talk about ideas and not personalities?
Well, I think we have to create cultures around ideas. Mm-hmm. And so whether it's an organizational culture or it's within our friend peer groups, is that we have to create this culture of ideation. Mm-hmm. That when we get together, the first thing we try to do is start to ideate.
Yeah.
Talk about things that are aspirational. And it's interesting because there's a great story about the Fosbury flop.
Okay.
The Fosbury flop. There's this Dick Fosbury, 1968, wins the gold medal, sets the record for high jump. If you think about high jump, the history of high jump, there was the scissors, mm-hmm. where you'd kind of chop your legs and go over the bar. Average height about 4 feet. And then the Western roll came in. And then the Eastern roll, which became the straddle. Mm-hmm. And all of it was based upon, the limiting factor wasn't based upon the genetics or the training or the nutrition. It was based around this idea about the landing. If you're going to fall from a height of 4 feet, 5 feet, 6 feet, 7 feet, I think the record is somewhere around 8 feet now. Mm-hmm. If you're going to fall from a height of 8 feet, there's only one body part you want to land on, and that's your feet. Mm-hmm. You don't want to land on your head.
Right.
And through the
can't go over the bar head first.
Exactly. And so what was the scissors? It was get your feet over first.
Yeah.
And land on your feet. And even the Western roll, which was, you launch with your right foot and you kind of do this roll thing and you land back on your right foot. The Eastern was sort of right to left. But anyways, as the evolution in the surface, the landing surface changed, this guy by the name of Dick Fosbury imagined a better way. Mm-hmm. He imagined that if you changed the angle of approach and if you went over the bar with your head first, you could actually get more height.
Okay.
And he set the record. And why I say all that is because you have to create, in order for ideas to have life, you have to create a culture of ideation. And if you change the landing, you'll change the launch.
Okay.
Because the landing became this big comfy thing. You could land on your head. You could do the Fosbury flop. Mm. You could figure out the best way to do it.
Yeah.
And so what I found in my experience, whether it's in church culture, organizational culture, is that there wasn't a welcoming environment for ideas.
Shut down.
They were shut down. Yeah. They were belittled. Mm-hmm. They were dismissed out of hand. They were marginalized. Right? There's all of these things. And so if you change the landing, if I want to cast an idea, if I want to put an idea, I like to call it the threshing floor.
Okay.
If I want to put an idea on the threshing floor, if you change the landing, if I can let it land softly so that we'll all take a run at it and we can talk about sort of how you think about that. If you change the landing, you'll change the launch.
Yeah.
And now people will start launching ideas instead of launching problems.
Yeah.
Because they'll be welcomed. They'll be welcomed with excitement.
Right.
And with optimism and with expectation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you don't do that, then what happens, it becomes very debilitating because we're like swirling in this downward vortex where we're not providing any answers or any solutions. We can only talk about, we're like in an echo chamber of what's wrong. In your church ministry, if everybody's talking about what's wrong and they don't have any solutions, what are you going to do as a pastor? You're going to figure out how to change the culture, right? But sometimes we don't see that outside of our local setting into other areas because it's local. But beyond that, I don't know. It's just sitting around tables hearing just the negative,
Right.
Is not productive.
The other problem with it is when we are always talking about problems, we start to believe that the problems are actually the problem.
Uh,
And there's no new thought. There's no new creativity.
yeah.
There's a question I like to ask of church leaders and of business leaders as well, which is, what is your critical constraint?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the thing that holds you back? We can list a litany of problems. There's that old exercise, people, list 5 things you don't like about yourself. Boom, people can list 5 things they don't like about themselves. I'd say list 5 things that you value or that you do exceptionally well or better than anybody else. And anybody, paralysis.
Yeah.
Right?
There's human nature.
It's
right
human
there.
nature.
Yeah.
And so we do this around our problems is we fixate around our problems and we try to fix the problems, but the problems aren't the critical constraint. We fix them, but we don't grow.
Yeah.
We fix them and we don't have, better uptake in the doctrine, better understanding, better we just fixed problems because they're not the problems that matter. They're the ones that are top of mind.
Yeah. I think that's key. If the culture is a place where you call it a threshing floor, I call it, there's different vantage points from it, but what are you putting on the table? What solution or what proposal? So there's an issue or there's an idea and we're going to try to take a run at it. What are we putting on the table to show that this is something we're working on instead of being a backseat driver? Everybody's really good at that. Yeah. But formulating something, developing something, building something, testing it, refining it, and then proposing it, where's that process? So you called it ideation and a culture of ideation. I think when people don't feel like that's available to them, then they internalize that. And when they internalize it, it becomes resentment. Resentment becomes criticism that's not constructive. And then that spins around, and now you got an environment that's not very unified.
Right.
Did you see that like in the corporate world?
100%.
Have you seen that working with teams?
100%.
Yeah.
The ideas.
What did you do, or what do you do in those situations?
So I think that the technology world gives us a lens into how to think about ideas because they're the purveyors of ideas. They are about helping you. And Steve Jobs always said, I never ask customers what they want because they don't know what they want because they haven't imagined it yet. Mm-hmm. And one of the things technology companies do really, really well is they iterate. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is they don't come out with version 10. They come out with version 1.
Yeah.
And they have this concept of the MVP, minimal viable product.
Okay.
And it releases people from the pressure of having it fully baked, fully formed, totally complete. It's like, no, it's my MVP.
Yeah.
And I think we have to think about our ideas not as fully formed, but as MVPs. It's like, I've been marinating on this idea. Mm-hmm. And I can't help.
And that needs to be open, that people need to know that.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. I've been marinating on this thing. I can't help but wonder if, and I don't have it fully worked out, it's still in the oven, whatever disclaimer you want to put on, but this idea that I'm inviting you to participate with me in the creation of this idea. And when I think about ideating, there are kind of really 4 things that you should do when somebody casts an idea.
Okay.
And of course, I've made it an acronym because it just makes it easier
Right.
to remember. But there's really only 4 options. You only have 4 options when somebody presents an idea to you.
Okay.
Number 1 is the I. So somebody presents an idea, you can improvise.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know anything about improvised comedy,
Mm-hmm.
but the way it works is it's yes and.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get to say, no, I want the pitch a little higher, the pitch a little lower. It's not. It's. I give you something. It's improvisation.
Yeah.
I give it to you, and you go yes and. You take it. That's the yes, and you build on it.
Yeah.
You add something to it.
Mm-hmm.
The D is you can make a decision. You can say, that's a great idea. Let's figure out how we start to build a process around that and figure out how we execute.
Or maybe it's not a good idea.
Or maybe it's not a good idea.
But we're still going to do yes and.
It's always yes and.
We're not just saying, oh, that's terrible.
It's
no, that
never a
won't
bad
work.
idea. You've only got 4 options
Yes.
in ideation.
Yes.
One
Okay.
is improvise, which is yes and.
Yeah.
Let me build on it. Let me add
Okay.
to it. The D is that's a really great idea. Let's figure out how to create a process around it and let's figure out how to execute.
Yes.
E is inquire.
Yes.
Hey, tell me more. Double click on it. Get curious
We
about it.
call this beta testing.
Yeah.
Like you build something, you got a prototype, and now you're going to beta test it.
Now you're going to build it.
Okay.
But as a recipient of your idea, my E is I'm going to inquire. I'm going to get really curious about ideas. That's fantastic. Tell me more. What about this? Help me with that. Oh, this is great. And you're continuing to invite more for them to build upon it. And then the last one, the A, is you can not approve, because in ideation, I'm not looking for approval. I'm looking for affirmation. That's really interesting.
Okay.
What you didn't hear me say is, I don't like that.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't hear me say, that's not a very good idea.
Right.
You didn't hear me say, that'll never work.
Mm-hmm.
You're either going to improvise, yes and.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to make a decision because it's a fully formed, baked idea.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to try to inquire more around it
Right.
and get more information, get really curious about it. Or you're going to affirm it as, that's a really interesting idea.
Yeah.
But you can't do the other ones.
Right.
That's to me that's how you create
Okay, so
an idea culture.
yeah. So in the WPF, there's a general counsel. We have general counsel.
Okay.
The general counsel ideates. We take ideas. Any idea is the yes and. It goes on a project board.
Okay.
And then on the project board, a team is assigned with the team leader.
Okay.
And they're going to build the prototype.
Okay.
So they build a prototype and then they beta test it, which means they go out and inquire. Like this is what we came up with. This is what we think is good, but we need to know what other people think. And so you float that out to other testers, not just the team.
Okay.
And then during that inquiry, you're getting a lot of good information back. And so you evaluate that, you refine it, and then that's what you present as a proposal. So you're working through the process. People are working on it, even if it's not something that is accepted. You still feel good about it. Everybody feels good about it. Like, this is what we did. We built this. We worked on this. We followed this structure, this plan. We took this idea, and it may not be accepted, but we still feel like we did something. So, which kind of fits what you just mentioned. And it's liberating because now everybody feels like I can be a part of that process.
I like it.
Yeah, and we encourage the same kind of thing in a local setting, because most of your good ideas are going to come from people that are in ministry already. They're seeing things that you don't see. They see the gaps that you don't see, and so when they come and say, "Hey, here is an idea," it should be a yes, and how can we tweak that or work that? Yeah. Okay. Next question for you. How can you discuss ideas and do it in such a way without bias.
Yeah. I mean, bias is hard. There's no doubt about it. We all have these.
But what is it about
latent-
somebody that, here's the idea, right? I'm proposing an idea.
Yeah.
And it should be blind to
Right.
anyone. It's merit based, right? Because it's an idea. An idea is, and it should be based on the merit of the idea, right? But why is it for some people it's so hard? But Andrew Bentley is the one that presented that. And I don't really know about Andrew Bentley, and so now it's already, before we even start discussing something, it's already inherent. It's got inherent bias in it. How do you avoid that?
So the language, the threshing floor language for me is that. It's like, this is an Andrew in the middle of the room.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to take a whack at him.
Yeah.
This is an idea.
Yeah.
And the idea is its own. It exists outside of the personality that
Mm-hmm.
presented it. It even exists to be a true idea. It exists even without the constraints that we typically might impose upon a process.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to build a bridge, if you're going to do something, there's an SOP, there's a procedure for doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But ideas exist sort of in space by themselves.
Right.
They're not constrained by an identity with an individual.
Mm-hmm.
They're not constrained by possibility. I'm fond of saying 99% of my first ideas are never very good.
Mm.
And I'm at peace with that. I'm at peace knowing that they need to be polished, that they need to be given more input.
Right.
There's an old saying, nobody's as smart as all of us. And there's a bunch of research on this fact that you can take 10 of the, how can I say this in the kindest way possible? Not particularly cerebral people.
Mm-hmm.
That's miskind. You can take 10 of those people or 20 of those people, 50, and they are overwhelmingly smarter
Right.
than the smartest person you know,
Mm-hmm.
because they have lived experience, because they have different points of view. And I think that's what happens with our ideas is we don't let them exist by themselves. They're always attached to the presentation.
Right.
They're attached to the possibility.
Mm-hmm.
They're attached to the personality.
Yeah.
And we have to decouple those
Mm-hmm.
in order to give them a fair chance at life.
Yeah. So the best way to counteract that is just keep the discussion around this is an idea.
It's just
And
an
there's
idea.
nothing there. It's actually fun debating the merits of the idea.
Yes.
So in order to keep the guardrails, it's not about, well, he or she, or it's about the idea. Let's stay focused on the idea. You
So
may
we
not.
call it, we call it in, when I get groups of people together,
Okay.
there's something called the Gestalt Protocol. And it simply says, speak from experience, not from opinion.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't have a lived experience, so if you say, hey, we're thinking about starting a bus route. I say, oh, buses, the average price of gas these days and this, and I go on and pontificate about all these things.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, you don't have a bus route. No, but I have an opinion on it.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that's interesting, but not particularly useful in ideation.
Yeah.
It may be useful once, I'm asking for an additional opinions.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where you get into the old hippo problem, right? This is why the Gestalt Protocol matters. Speak from experience, not from opinion, because you got to get away from the hippo, the highest paid person's opinion, right? And that's what so often happens.
So
And an opinion can be highest paid. It could be highest status, but it's this idea that ideas, they get cast, and then the hippo, highest paid person's opinion,
Yeah.
comes in, and it kills it.
yeah. So as a leader, let me just take that on a local level, right? So the hippo typically in ministry, team leading things would be me, the pastor.
Yes, sir.
So how do I encourage? I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. How do I ward that off to where people don't feel like, well, you know, what every pastor says is what, because that's not a healthy environment. You want to get some debate,
For sure.
and there needs to be a certain liberty for somebody to be able to address that.
Mm-hmm.
So what do I need to do as a hippo
Yeah.
to foster that?
So the pithy little expression is leaders speak least and speak last.
Okay.
Right? Because you're trying to create, again.
Yeah. So we're going to open this discussion up. We want to hear from all of you.
Yes.
So, so let's start with you.
Yeah.
All right. And then you listen to everything.
And there's rules, there's ways to think about that. Cold calling, most people tend not to like to be cold called. The people who are high extroverts, high opinion, they love to be cold called.
Yeah.
In fact, they may not even wait for you to cold call because they've already got their hand up in the air.
I like to talk.
Yeah, exactly. They're like Bible quizzers. They're like hitting the buzzer before the question.
Yes. Interrupt. Boom.
Interrupt, exactly. Let me finish the question and give you the answer. So, being cognizant of that.
So you're facilitating
correctly.
You're
That's
like,
exactly
we need to hear from, let's start with, somebody that may not just jump out and do it.
If we missed anybody, I'll often, because the introverts are always the last ones.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing about introverts is they often have the best ideas.
Yeah.
But they have these little Cheshire cat smiles because they know they have a great idea, but they have no need, no compunction to have to tell it.
Right.
Whereas the extroverts don't have the best idea, but they're dying to tell it.
Yeah. Right.
Facilitation.
That's awesome. Hippo. I think that's really good. And in your experience, more effective leadership comes from CEOs, pastors, team leaders, hearing from everybody and not letting their voice be the deciding factor. And they probably, in some cases, work against that. Because if everybody's just agreeing with me, I'd be maybe making some big mistakes.
It's groupthink.
Yeah.
Lee Iacocca, they were debating something at Chrysler. And he made the comment, if everybody's thinking the same thing, somebody's not thinking.
Yeah, okay.
And so as leaders, people like the harmony.
Mm-hmm.
What makes meetings interesting is the conflict and the positive conflict. It's the, why do we read a book? Because there's conflict, there's tension, there's characters. And I think our meetings as leaders, we need to get good at being able to cultivate healthy and productive conflict so that we're getting people's ideas and hearing from everyone. And we're not leading the jury, as the saying goes, by stating our opinion first. But as the leader, we're speaking least and we're speaking last.
I like that. That's really good. Wow. How much of systems and interconnections feed into the formulation of ideas? It's one thing, right, to have ideas, but if they just die, that's not good. Right. There's got to be some kind of process, right? I mean, I mentioned the process that we kind of use, but in your experience, what's a good process?
Well, to continue this idea of ideation, I have a thought I've been working on. It's still in the oven, but there's an interesting chemistry around diamonds. diamonds are like graphite, pure carbon. But what's interesting about a diamond versus graphites, you can think pencils, softer. Diamonds, great conductors of heat, maybe the best conductors of heat. One of the hardest surfaces known to humankind. High value. They're made up of the exact same thing.
Okay.
What differentiates why diamonds are so important and so valuable to us from an industrial standpoint versus graphite is the way the molecules are laid down. And systems.
Dense versus less dense?
The structure of them,
Okay.
in terms of the way they are structured, versus one on a single plane versus others in a different formation that we can get into. But what makes things succeed is not, well, I'm smart, they're smart. I have people, they have people. Graphite has carbon, diamonds have carbon. It's all they are. But because of the system, the way the molecules are laid down, it changes the function, the capability of the diamond.
Okay.
And so it is with our ideas, so it is with our church, so it is with all leadership, is the systems and the structure
Right.
is what makes them successful.
Right.
Structure is the collection of elements or components that essentially support.
Yeah.
Systems are a collection of elements that enable function and capability. And so as leaders, we have to get really good because we all have people. You have people, I have people. You have money, I have money. You have a building, I have a building. It's the systems we put behind them in order to make them successful.
Right.
And so with our ideas, we have to have not only the culture. So I think it's three things. It's the culture. How do we get ideas on the table? How do we generate ideas? How do we create that culture of ideation? Secondly, what are the processes we put in place in order to realize those ideas?
Yes.
And then lastly, the execution
Yes.
of those. Because you can have a great process, but if you don't have execution,
Correct.
then you don't have success at the end of the day.
Yeah, and people are going to see that they're going to be disappointed because
Correct.
we had an idea. It's supposed to. They were working on it. Well, what happened to it? Well, I don't know. It just never. Well, that's not.
Never
That's
saw the
not.
light of day.
That's not good.
No.
That's going to kill motivation. And it's going to kill forward movement. Okay, so repeat that again. The three things.
Culture. So
culture.
how do we get ideas out?
Culture is important.
Process.
The
What
process.
is the process? The systems and the structure. Structure is what essentially shores a thing up. The structure is what gives it that ability
Right.
to stand. The systems are the activation of something.
Right.
And so we need the culture, so the ideas come out. We need the processes to actually bring them through life, and then we need the execution.
So the execution is when you are activating in its final form the idea.
Sun Tzu said this. He said, The Art of War, said, strategy with tactics is the fastest way to victory. Tactics without strategy is the sound before defeat.
Okay. Yeah.
And so again, this we're introducing more concepts into the idea. But what is the strategy? What is the why? What is the large outcome? And then the tactics. And in tactics we talk about, and part of the processes, as part of that is the assignment of ownership.
Right.
What are the outcome measures? Like how do we know that we're achieving something?
Right.
And all of that is part of that.
Yeah. Okay, this is really good. So the last thing is, you have an idea. Somebody has an idea. You work on the idea. You build the idea. You get all the feedback. You get all the inquiring evaluation. It is something that is at some point a proposal. You're trying to finalize whether or not we're actually going to pull the trigger on it. And then when we do, right, then there's follow-up and all the outcomes that you're talking about. How are we measuring whether or not it's successful or not, right? The outcomes. How do you feel about the idea being an open-ended thing? Is that correct in thinking it's open-ended? What are the pitfalls if it's not open-ended?
Tell me more.
Well,
by open-ended,
like if you activate something and it's a good idea at the time,
yes,
and it may have a shelf life, right? At some point, you may look at everything that you did and say, we need to either tweak this, rethink this, or do something different. That's what I mean by open-ended.
Yeah.
Like if it's still working and it's still hitting the right target, then man, that's amazing. But what if things shift? And now you're committed, you're so committed that you're just gonna keep doing it when you should maneuver or go a different direction.
So the official term on that is called the sunk cost fallacy.
Okay.
It's the technical term for.
Yeah. Like what that sounds like is put a lot of time and effort in this. I'm really married to this. I'm not
100%.
Giving it up.
100%.
Okay.
And it is a fallacy. It has.
I'm just going to keep doing the same thing because I put so much time and effort into it.
And so part of it's the sunk cost fallacy, sort of partnered with the definition of insanity, right?
Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Yeah.
And so your ability as a leader to know when to pivot.
Mm-hmm. I like that term. Yeah. It's a pivot.
It is a pivot. It's not, we're not crushing it, killing it. We're just pivoting.
We're not denying that it didn't work and it wasn't a good idea and the people that were involved did it. They did an amazing job. Great.
100%.
Yeah.
And so I think, again, as the leader, you help set that culture. And how would you do that? One of the ways is by not going to the mat on your own ideas. Right? Lead by example. Mm-hmm. We were talking about doing this, and I remember I presented to everyone we were going to do this, and on further consideration, I've been particularly prayerful on one particular element of this, and I felt that's not where God wanted us to be at this time, at this place. Mm-hmm. And as much as I love the idea, I think we need to pivot.
Yeah.
And so as you begin to model that in the culture, mm-hmm. and people see that you have a willingness and a flexibility, that your ideas aren't always going to survive. That's what gives people the willingness to, because there's a risk. There's a risk.
Yeah.
People are constantly, we live in our heads.
Right.
And we talked about failure tonight, mm-hmm. and people wear a lot of pressure around failure.
Yeah. That's good. So in conclusion, you give me an example, I'll give you an example. What's the biggest pivot that you've experienced in your life? Like I was doing this at work for me. It was, everything was well, but at some point I realized I need to pivot off of this because just continuing to do this is not a good idea. Maybe at one point it was a good idea, but then it became a point where I needed to pivot to another idea.
Yeah, for me, I have a high tolerance for pivoting. So I would say in virtually everything I've started, I've pivoted because
There's a
everything has a
certain
best
risk in
before
that,
date.
though, right?
Is there a risk?
If you're worried about the perception, I'm
I
thinking
guess.
in the perception of people typically won't pivot because they feel like there's risk involved based on what somebody else may say, think, do, and they'll stay in that particular. They'll go that particular direction, and they won't pivot, or it will be longer. They'll stay in it longer until the wheels start to fall off.
People do it investing all the time. It's this race to the bottom because they're not willing to accept the fact that they were wrong.
Yeah.
And I think, again, as leaders, it's imperative that we realize that we're wrong. I don't know what percentage of the time. The problem is we hold on too long, oftentimes, to save face.
Is that, and there's a certain amount of control that goes into that. Not admitting that, that was a mistake.
I have complete comfort with the idea that I've always used the number 99%, and it probably is that high, that 99% of my first ideas are not my best ideas.
Yeah.
And that when I invite people to come along beside me around those ideas, they inevitably get better.
Yeah. And in the process of that, has to be a certain level of diplomacy. Right? That's skill. So back to the pivot thing. What in your life that was a major pivot for you?
Well, there's been lots of investments that I've pivoted out of.
Yeah.
There's been jobs that I've pivoted out of.
Yeah. Give me an example.
Leaving AWS, Amazon.
Okay. And for Amazon, what were you doing for Amazon?
I was a regional director.
Okay. And so, and how long did you do that?
Approximately a year.
And you pivoted out of it for what reason?
It was relentlessly and all-consuming.
So you realized at some point that the level of energy and everything was just not sustainable.
It was not sustainable. It was bordering on destructive, and it removed me from the thing that I value most, which is the kingdom of God in my family.
Yeah, awesome. For me, I know what it was when, and probably the biggest pivot was after I got married. Prior to that, we had a family business. Family business was good, worked well. It provided a certain level for me as a 19-year-old. Had a small house. And it was a janitorial business, family run, very successful. And then I got married. And at some point, the pivot was not that this is a bad thing, but are you going to do that? How long are you going to do that? And that became a huge pivot moment. In those days, education, you could actually, that was something you should strive for, right? and you would get a degree and it would elevate and help you. Nowadays, it's a little different. But then that moment, that was a pivotal moment. I realized, okay, and if that meant I need to do something different, then I have to better myself. Then I have to acknowledge where I lack. And where I lacked was in a formal education. I didn't spend a whole lot. I did the minimum. I was involved in too many other things. Sports, athletics, anything to do with the ball, baseball, basketball, football. We were playing it. And I was working at the same time, even as a student. So I really didn't have a focus on education at all. So it meant it was so pivotal, and I'm married now, that I ended up going to an adult learning center and starting on that journey of, I really didn't get anything out of my education. And I'm really starting at ground zero. And so I went to an adult learning center, and there was a lady there. I still remember her name was Julie Smezrud. And she was amazing because she projected what could be, even though we were talking about what are the basics to an essay? How do you add and subtract integers? I mean, how do you use mnemonics to memorize some things? It started with her, and really, she was the one that kind of catapulted. I can do this. I can achieve this. But it started there. That was a major pivot moment in my life. So the idea of, okay, this has been good. Somebody had an idea. I mean, my uncles had an idea that let's start this. There's a demand for it. We can, and for a lot of us, it worked, and it's still working for some. So it's been successful that long. But in my mind, could I keep doing that? Could I extrapolate that out over time? And I didn't feel like I could. So I had to better myself, personal development. And for me, that was like a major pivot. Any other words of wisdom regarding ideation, pivots, productive culture that leads to an environment where people feel free to express their ideas? Because I've seen situations like we've already talked about where an idea is expressed and it immediately just gets shot down. And then that creates a culture. And that culture is just keep my mouth shut. But at the same time, I'm not happy about it.
So I would say it's a fabulous time to be in the kingdom of God. Such a great opportunity. The contrast and compare opportunity in front of us is so incredible. And we need people to come forward with ideas and to take advantage of this unique time that we have. And kind of reminded of a story. Microsoft CEO, Satya Nadella. If you had invested $10,000 in Microsoft in the 10 years prior to him, you would have about $13,400. The 10,000 would have grown to 13,400. Right. If you had invested in the 10 years that he was CEO, you'd have 124,000. 10x.
Yeah.
And what he did that was different than, you think about Bill and Ballmer and their influence on Microsoft, you'd think, if ever Microsoft was going to do great, it would have been with crazy Steve Ballmer and, of course, Bill Gates at the helm.
Yeah.
But that 10-year period with Satya Nadella was so pivotal. And it was pivotal because he brought a mantra to the company that was, we are no longer going to be a know-it-all company. We're going to be a learn-it-all company. And that change from an ego-driven, we know it all, to we're going to learn it all.
Yeah.
And I think about the kingdom of God, and there are so many opportunities I think about for innovation. We have not changed giving in the 40 years that I've attended. It's been, for all intents and purposes, there's been an offering plate. There's probably been a capital campaign. There's been foreign missions. But we haven't innovated around giving. And I think there are opportunities around that. Yeah. There are just so many ways to think about how to do things differently in the kingdom of God. And the world needs us.
Yeah.
And the only way we're going to get better, the only way we're going to reach our world, the only way we're going to have an impact is is we got to bring forward ideas. We got to create a culture of ideation.
Awesome. Thank you very much for spending a few moments with us at the Loops podcast. Thank you.